Evening, John.
Evening.
I should put this on, shouldn't I? My name is Peter Martin. I'm chairman of the Overview and the Resources, the Overview and the Scrutiny Resources Committee, to give its proper title, of this newly elected council. I'm accompanied by my vice chairman, Councillor Andrew Lawton, who will say hello. Good evening. The first thing I want to do is just run around the chamber, both members and officers, just to make sure that we all know who everybody is. Shall we start over here, Michaela? I'll put your button on, just say who you are, where you're from.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Michaela Wicks, and this is my second term as a councillor for Waverley Borough Council. Prior to that, I worked for Waverley Borough Council for nearly 30 years. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Lauren Atkins. I'm a councillor for Bramley and Monash Ward.
Hi, Zoe Bartholomax. I'm from Hazelmere.
Councillor Jerome Davidson from Hindhead, Hazelmere. This is my second term. Thank you.
Terry Weldon from Hazelmere East Ward, same as Zoe, and first term newbie.
Andy McLeod, I'm the councillor for Farnham Moor Park. I think this is my third term, actually. Thank you.
And I'm first term. My name's Janet Crowe. My ward is Farncombe and Cadishall.
Thank you very much. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Layla Mensor. I'm the Democratic Services Officer.
And then perhaps we can start over there with Fiona.
Good evening, Fiona Cameron, the Interim Democratic Services Manager.
Good evening, Janie Sturgis, the Policy and Performance Officer.
Hello, I'm Marika van der Eyden and I'm the Executive Head for Assets and Property.
Hi, I'm Nicola Hames. I'm Executive Head for Communications and Customer Services.
Good evening, I'm Andrew Smith, Executive Head for Housing Services.
Hi, I'm Peter Vickers, Head of Finance. Good evening, everyone. Robin Taylor, Executive Head of Organisational Development.
Thank you very much indeed. We have also Paul Follows, the Leader of the Council, in the audience as well. Ladies and gentlemen, the bulk of this meeting is really by way of introduction and induction. We have two substantive items, but I have moved the agenda around a little. I've got you should have copies of the agenda as they are now. There's nothing new, it's just been moved around. We'll start with the substantive item, which is the workforce profile. We'll then go on to the presentations from heads of the services that we are responsible for. And I want everybody to be very clear as to those areas which are our responsibility. And then we can go on to more logically to the corporate performance reports, where armed with the information about who does what, you are in a better position to ask questions regarding the corporate performance. We will then, towards the end of the meeting, go on to look at the committee work programme going forward. I hope that that is all clear. Right, if we then go to agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Layla, I don't think there are any.
No, Chair.
We have a full attendance, very well done. Item 2, the minutes of the meeting that we last held on the 20th of March, when many of you are not here. Are you all happy for me later to sign that as a correct record of that meeting? Okay, I'll do that later, thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. I don't think I've received any. Are there any, Layla?
Nope, none received.
None received. Are there any that anybody wants to declare now? Okay, then we go on to item 4, questions from members of the public. Leila, are there any?
No, there's none.
None received. Okay. Item 5, are there any questions from members, Leila?
No questions from members. No.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's then go on to the first substantive item, which is the workforce profile for 2022 to 2023. It was circulated to you with the agenda papers. But we have John Formby on Zoom here. I hope that you can all see him. And I'll ask John if he will to please introduce this item. John.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. My name's John Formby. I'm the Interim Human Resources Manager at Waverley. So nice to meet you all virtually. The workforce profile document is an annual document that we do. So it's a snapshot of looking at a range of different categories of our workforce here at Waverley on a number of things. If you've not had a chance to sort of look at it in any detail, I'll just briefly sort of explain the headings that it looks at. So it looks at some of our, I guess, our protected characteristics data around equal opportunities. It looks at things like our age profile, our ethnicity profile, disability profile, our gender profile, and it also looks at some of our key human resources statistics, such as our sickness absence statistics, our long-term and short-term figures, and also looks at our turnover figures. So let me know, I guess, what's most helpful for you. I mean, that is a snapshot in time. I have got some notes I can go through, and I can explain sort of some of the things that we're actually doing post the workforce profile, if that's helpful. Or if you've got any specific questions about the data, I'm happy to sort of answer those. Over to you, really.
Okay, thank you. I presume that you have all read the document. Are there any questions or observations or thoughts to share with us, or any questions to ask of John? Zeri.
I do. Mine relates to sick days. It seems to me we have, well, it's not seems to me, it's in the data. Our sick days are 60% higher than the national average. And furthermore, our sick days for mental health are 6 times greater than the national average. And I want to know why, but also what we can do to address that.
John, I think we'll take questions as we go along. So would you like to answer that one straight away? Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yes, we've noticed in recent times an increase in mental health, and that's both in long-term and short-term absences. I think that's probably a number of reasons looking at the data. I think some of that comes out of some significant long-term cases we've had in some of the service areas. Sometimes those cases give a slightly, whilst they're real cases, they give a slightly sort of kind of skewed picture in terms of our overall figures, because in a workforce of our size, a number of long-term sick cases can look quite significant. But that's not to say in any way that we're not concerned that there is an increase in terms of our mental health statistics. So one of the things we're looking at very strongly is health and well-being, and particularly at a time now where Waverley staff are sort of getting a little bit concerned, I would say, in terms of what's coming next, in terms of the transformation and collaboration. And there was a survey done across both Waverley and Guildford looking at health and well-being based on the Health and Safety Executive to try and identify some areas where we can look at improving our general health and well-being, and also sort of preventing, I think, those absence figures. So the health and well-being survey picked up a particular number of areas, which on sort of number of data that we're drilling down on. Some of those issues relate to particularly at Waverley workload. So that is a particular issue that we're looking at. Some of the issues relate to bullying. Those bullying areas we need to drill down a little bit further on, but the sort of initial anecdotal evidence suggests that some of that, or at least the majority of that, is actually coming to officers from members of the public, particularly in areas like housing and planning, when they're out visiting and doing site inspections and planning applications. So it's something that we're really concerned with. We're talking to the unions about. We're looking at how we can improve our guidance from staff to members of the public about what treatment we'd expect. We're also looking at how we can make officers, particularly in planning, more resilient and look at how we can identify and help them support their workload through training around their own organisation, training resilience, and also knocks onto some of the statistics about how we can make sure we look to retain more staff, because planning in particular, both Waverley and Guildford, has been an area that's been under quite a lot of significant pressure. So those are a couple of areas that particularly I think have been high in terms of the figures, although generally the other areas are sort of along with sort of national trends, but those couple of areas have particularly heightened in terms of long-term sick cases and short-term sick cases.
Okay, thank you. Any follow-up, Zoe?
Yes, thanks. Can I check, do you know how we fare compared to other councils? Because, I understand they might get objectionable responses in housing and planning, but, all council workers will have the same experience, I would have thought.
Well, the Health and Safety Executive Survey, that does allow us to benchmark broadly against other councils. And on those figures, we actually perform reasonably well. We're in the sort of upper quartile in terms of our responses in relation to individuals' health and well-being and control. But I think we just need to be a little bit careful about that. So on the face of it, it looks a positive story over all of the areas of sort of control for workers, but it doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't be looking at that and seeing how in a particular areas like planning we can improve that. What it doesn't allow us to do is to sort of specifically compare in the survey the sort of more granular data and look at how planning at Waverley compares to planning at another area. Because of the nature of the survey, it is completed sort of from an anonymous perspective. So you're looking at sort of quite broad trends and comparisons across the whole of the council in that data compared to another similar council.
Chair, would I be able to add to that comment, if that's okay?
Yes, please.
Just to draw members' attention to page 102 of your document pack, which we'll be looking at in a later item, does give you some commentary about how the council compares in terms of turnover and total staff sickness compared with other Surrey districts and boroughs. And to sort of put it quickly, we compare favourably, fairly favourably, but it's still an issue that we need to keep looking at. So there is some more contextual information for you.
Okay, thank you, Robin. Andrew?
Yes, I have a question. I can't see any reference to the vacancy rates. Is there a statistic on vacancy rates by department?
That's not something we've previously included, but that's certainly a figure that we can look to provide for the committee in the future.
So can you give any indication about which of the departments which have a higher vacancies than others at the moment?
I can't give you any specific data on that. There are particular areas I can tell you that we struggle along with other local authorities. So planning would be one of those that we do traditionally struggle with. Legal services as well has been an area where we've struggled to retain staff. And so often those areas we've had to sort of move more to agency staff. Those things are generally in line though, as I understand, with local authorities across the country.
Thank you.
Andy MacLeod. Andy.
Thank you, Chairman. I was interested in the chart on turnover by grade, by percentage. It's just fairly striking that the high percentages are right at the bottom and right at the top, actually, although the numbers at the top are small. I just wondered if any comment on that, particularly actually, we're obviously losing a lot of people at the bottom levels compared with those in the middle levels. And a high percentage at the top, but that's, as I say, very small numbers.
Yes, I think there's a number of things behind that. Over the last sort of 12 months, we did the restructure of the senior management officer team. And so a number of staff across Waverley decided to leave in those roles. So that's, as you say, it's quite a small proportion of people. That sort of gives us quite a high percentage turnover. And at the lower end, one of the things I think that sits behind that, and this is sort of relates to one of the key statistics we're looking at is our age profile. Where we have lots of staff joining us sort of under the age of 30, we are having a bit of a challenge retaining those staff, and that's something I'm looking at sort of more closely this year about how we can kind of improve our succession planning. We seem to be quite good at recruiting staff sort of out of college, apprentices, graduate trainees at Waverley. And that's something I definitely want to kind of make sure we carry on doing. But then we need to look at what opportunities we can create. So we're looking at how we can put in a more formal process of succession planning and identify people for future roles. And that will also help us support what currently is a sort of gradually aging workforce. You'll see in the figures we're around sort of just over 48 years at Waverley. And so we need to really build some resilience and some skills in our more junior staff, both as a retention tool to make sure we don't lose as many of them, but also to create opportunities and make sure they're ready to step up when the opportunities arise.
Jerome,
Can I? Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman. Possibly a slightly flippant question, followed by, I think may well be a more helpful one, which is, I noted the lack of declarations in your surveys and the use of and reporting of those in your statistics. I wonder whether that actually sort of makes that statistic gathering really a worthwhile exercise when sort of 67%, or I can't remember the exact numbers, don't declare. That's possibly a slightly trivial question to ask. But the other, which I think is possibly more important, is the extent to which the council is actively using and exploring the use of artificial intelligence technology to reduce its dependence on staff.
Yeah, thank you. So I think you're referring to the ethnicity data there in terms of people declaring
and
on
religion,
that figure.
And religion.
Yeah, that's a challenge, not just for us. That's a challenge I think I've come across at various organisations. We aim to try and capture it both when we have new joiners and we give people the option to complete equal opportunities monitoring data at that side. We also went out last year around all staff to ask them to complete that same data. It is a really tricky one. We did get further information back, but as you said, it's an area that I think alongside most organisations do tend to struggle to get enough data, particularly in those protected characteristic areas. But it's something that we just need to keep pushing on and carrying on to do. In regard to artificial intelligence, I did attend a seminar run by Hayes on that quite recently, and they were looking at particular areas where a range of organisations, a range of different service areas could potentially do that, looking at things like customer services, but we're in at the very early stages of that. But it's certainly something the market information is saying could move very quickly in the next 1 to 2 years. And I think we'll be looking at that also and factoring that in as part of the transformation and collaboration programme and see if that's an area that we need to look more closely at.
Well,
I think the leader would just like to make a comment before you come in, Jerome. Maybe he's going to be replaced by this threat. It would be quite interesting, wouldn't it? Thank you.
Oh, I don't know if electoral law will keep up with that, Peter, but thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just to say, for areas where we have a long-term sets of vacancies, like planning, for example, Councillor Townsend and I actually did have a presentation from a provider that effectively uses a low-level AI for the processing of very basic planning applications, for example. And one of the things it does is it will do most of the sort of basic checks and then will flag where there are issues that need a human to come and look at it, and it will free up staff to do some of the larger applications that require more work. I don't think we would ever look at this directly to replace staff, but for areas where we've already got persistent vacancies that we can't fill, I think it's a reasonable thing for us to look at and something that we've already started doing. So thank you for raising it.
Jerome, you want to come back? I'll come to Zoe afterwards.
Well, it's just a follow on to my first rather simplistic question about people not declaring their ethnicity or whatever on these surveys. Is it really worthwhile capturing that data? Is there so many gaps? Is that something which we ought to be doing, or is it a mandatory government requirement?
I think we could debate that till the cows come home. I think we have to offer people the chance that they don't want to, we can't make them, but it's interesting to get the information that we do have. But John, do you want to come back on that?
Well, I think we've got, I mean, there's interesting actually, because we have to report to the government on a number of different statistics. So we do report on an annual basis on our gender pay gap, for example. And the government are now also looking at organisations of whether we'd start to report on our ethnicity pay gap. But you're quite right in some ways. One of the points that I was sort of discussing with Southeast employers recently is if you're getting figures reporting under a certain level, you have to be very careful about the anonymity of data. So whilst the gender pay gap, we do get significant kind of figures on that, and we do know the breakdown of our workforce. If we were looking at reporting on our ethnicity figures based on the responses we've currently got, we would be probably unable to report on that. So that's I guess the reality of the situation. But it's something that, as I said, we continue to kind of work on to see if we can get more data into that, because it may well be we are asked to report by the government on that in the not too distant future.
Okay, thank you, John. Zoe.
Hi, thanks. Can I just ask Paul, he mentioned that you wouldn't use AI to replace staff, you'd just use it where you have persistent vacancies. I do wonder, is that a statement of principle? It seems to me we should be looking at using AI. If it enables us to deliver the services for cheaper, then we should be looking at it regardless of whether or not you have vacancies.
If cheapness and that is your only definition of value, perhaps, but it isn't for me and it isn't for the rest of the executive, where in general I would focus our energies looking at places where we prioritise that are areas where we have persistent gaps. I think in the long run, you would always be looking for opportunities, but with a finite amount of people to look at opportunities in depth, I would focus on the areas where I know there are persistent vacancies first. So that's where we've been looking at first, planning, but I'm sure there will in time be other areas.
Yes, my own observation of AI is that it's at a very early stage, and it's a good thing to have to assist, but it's going to be a long time before it takes over, it seems to me. Who is next? Michaela, I think, next, and then Lauren, I think you wanted to come in. So Michaela. Thank you, Chair.
In relation to Councillor Davidson, I was going to ask exactly the same question, so it wasn't a silly question. In relation to the succession of younger workers, it says agile working. Is that the new word for hybrid working? If we've got younger members of staff who are employed here, who are working from home, how are they going to learn how to work in an office environment if they're remotely working, no supervision from their managers or supervisors? How are they going to learn to interact with their colleagues and learn their job properly? They're going to get bored, frustrated, and hand their notice in. So how are we going, agile working doesn't work. I came in here the other day to see somebody for a housing benefit need, and I was told all the housing benefit staff were working from home. Now, the residents in this borough who are the most vulnerable need somebody in the office to assist them with their housing benefit application forms, not just sit on a telephone to somebody who sat at home in reception for everybody else to hear, and there's nobody in the office who can assist them with their forms. It's outrageous.
Thank you, John.
Yes, a couple of points I'd like to make in relation to that. So firstly, we actually don't force, if that's the right word, people in terms of whether they do agile or hybrid working. At the moment, interestingly, the majority of our younger staff do actually prefer to come into the office. And I think that's a really positive thing, because I think they can still gather a lot in terms of both information, training, etc., from their colleagues. But I don't want to lose the broader benefits of what I would see coming out of team working in the workplace. And so very recently, just a couple of weeks ago, I've introduced something called Waverley Team Days. And it's not a mandatory thing at this stage, just to say, but it's encouraging teams to actually come in on a more regular basis where all members of their teams come in, so they can use that time to have their team meeting, they can do some team training, and they can also use that to capture some of the things that used to be, I see as being very beneficial, the kind of on-the-job learning, the things that you learn from your colleagues with just being in the office. We're in discussion at the moment in terms of what agile working might look like in the future across both Guildford and Waverley. And I know there's sort of definitely mixed views on that, but I think I would like to sort of my ideal in the future would be to capture both of those worlds by having some further kind of working in the office, but tied in with the benefits that many staff find around flexible working.
Michaela, you want to come back?
Yes, please, Chair. But why are people working from home? Why are they not in the office? You say that one of the biggest things is bullying to officers when they go out and about. If they do not come in the office and learn the culture of the office and learn about the residents they're going to visit, because everything is on their computer at home, they're not going to be resilient enough to deal with difficult members of the public because they're not trained to do that. So the bullying comes from officers who are not experienced with learning to deal with the public face to face. Now, we're not in COVID anymore. Why isn't everybody back in the office? Most people are complaining to officers because the service is not good enough.
I think we've got that, but come on, John, do you want to come back?
Thank you, Chair.
Chairman, if may I answer that one, please? Just
Robin, yes.
Yeah. I mean, Chairman, this is a balancing act. And it's not, we don't have members of staff working at home because of COVID. Like everywhere else, there was an emergency response when we had the pandemic, and clearly that accelerated changes in workplace culture, which, that's the case across the planet. What we're now doing is a planned approach. And as John said, and I'll pick up later in my presentation, we're still working out exactly how to do this, but there is absolutely no intention to have everybody working from home. One of the things that we're balancing here is trying to attract people into the organisation. And there's a balancing act there. For some people, that will mean making sure that we can give them somewhere to work in the office. For others, it will be absolutely making sure that they're not expected to come into the office 5 days a week. And that is part of our recruitment and retention strategy. So we need to take the concerns that Councillor Wicks is raising there are absolutely fair concerns, and we're having to work through all of those. So I don't dismiss them at all, but it's unlikely to be one approach or another. This organisation isn't going to suddenly get everybody back into the office in the way that we used to work. That is not going to serve our best interests in terms of recruitment and retention. But it is something we'll be thinking through very carefully, and we'll be continuing to engage this committee on so we can talk about it here as well.
Okay, thank you. Janet, did you want to come in on this point, or was your point something different? Okay, fine. Let's go then to Lauren. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My point was actually on exactly the same area. I'm interested to understand what % of people do work from home. And you've said that we can't just make people come back to work. Well, I have a business, and I know lots of businesses in the private sector have done exactly that. And I think unless you make people come back to the office, then it says in here, a percentage cited low morale and explain the team atmosphere hasn't been good since COVID and working remotely. So if it's a problem, why don't we make people come back? I'm confused.
I think that's another one for you, Robin.
I mean, just to be clear, clearly the employer can force people to come back into work. If that's what we decided to do as an organisation, I don't think it would be in the best interests of the organisation to do so. And we need to be sort of careful not to see it all in the same, paint everything with the same brush. The approach that Waverley's taken has been for each manager to look at their team and to look at whether the post is best done in a hybrid way, as an office worker, as a home worker, or a travelling worker. And actually, it's not just about the post, it's about the person, which is the point that we started with. So no one is forced to work at home. And also, no employee, if you like, is given the right to never come into the office. It's about the manager managing it in the most effective way.
Okay, thank you. Terry, do you want to come in on this point? Okay, Terry.
First of all, I want to defend the principle of hybrid or agile working. We've heard before there can be problems with recruitment and retention, and the fact is a lot of people simply prefer to work from home at least some of the time. And if we ban it completely, it just makes recruitment and retention much more difficult, I would guess. However, I do have a question which comes back to the other point that was made by Councillor Wicks, which is that she says that the whole housing benefits team are working from home, and that I find distinctly disturbing. Because if a resident has to come into the office, ask for help, and then finds they're talking to someone on the telephone, That seems bizarre. It does seem to me that in each team, there should be at least some people in the office who can deal with residents face to face.
Robin or Andrew, do you want to come in on this?
I'm not sure I've got anything further to add in terms of that, no, Chair. Thank you.
Zoe?
Yeah, one more. And I just wonder if we could ask for the data on a department level, what percentage are working from home and what management structures you've got in place to ensure that we do have representation during the working day for customer facing services.
Chair, I think we can provide that. Actually, from memory, it was a stat which was provided into a previous version of this committee. So I'm happy for John and I to take an action to go away and bring that statistic back.
Thank you. And let us move on. Are there any other questions from members of the committee? Janet, sorry, I did say I'd come back to you. My apologies.
Thank you, Chair. I notice here that finance remains one of the service areas with the lowest turnover. I just wondered if finance is a special secret.
Microphone, Jen.
Well, your head of finance is leaving, so you can't count me into this, to be fair. But it's a professional team, and there is professional development, there's structure within the team, there is support, there is hybrid working, there is management, there is supervision, all the ingredients that make a team function. There's no secret to it. It's just the way the world is.
One final question from me, if I may. Could you please advise us further on collaboration and the impact on staff and morale and how that is going and how you expect it to go in the next 6 months or so? Leader, you want to take that?
I'll have to take that one in the absence of the Chief Executive. So Tom meets regularly with staff on this subject. And certainly when we get to major crux points in the next phases of the collaboration, I'm sure he'll continue to do that. And certainly I volunteered, as have members of the executive, to join in that so that we can brief a little bit on what's coming. The next phases of collaboration effectively are going to be discussed at an executive session on September the 5th prior to its coming to council. And I imagine the same is going to be roughly true in terms of timing at Guildford. So really there'll be not a lot extra over the summer, but certainly when we get back, you'll be seeing the next stages of what we'll be looking at in terms of services, staff, and also location, which I'm sure will be the next thing that people are particularly interested to hear about what the intentions are. So we're trying to keep staff updated as we go. I know Tom sends all staff emails around fairly regularly to members of the staff here. Certainly I get a copy of those so I can see what staff have been told and can properly respond to anybody that comes to speak to us or the executive. But as far as I'm aware, staff are being kept properly in the loop, and I would encourage them to tell Tom, their managers, service heads, or members of the executive if they don't feel they're being kept up to date with what's going on.
Okay, thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to bring that item to a close. We were just here to receive the report on the profile. We've made a number of comments, particularly on sick days, on agile working, on retention. We've noted comments on bullying from members of the public, which is disturbing, and several other points. The committee may want to consider whether we would perhaps review agile working as an item to come to the committee at some future point. If members feel that way, then we can certainly include that in a future meeting, because that seems to have been something which members are particularly interested in.
I think that's important, and I'd like that to happen if I may request, Chairman.
Okay, well, at the end of the meeting, we will be talking about the future and things that we want to put on the future work programme. So let's hold that for a moment and add that. Leila, if you can take a special note on that. Okay, thank you very much indeed. We'll draw that to a close and say, John, thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's been most helpful. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, we now come to presentations from service heads. This is really important. It's when you join a scrutiny committee, you really do need to understand the areas and the departments where we do have the role of scrutiny. I think it's important that we understand those departments from the horse's mouth, as it were. And we've got a series of presentations. Some of them have been sent to you earlier in the day. I hope you've been able to have a look through those. We're trying to limit each person to 8 minutes. I think that will be quite a challenge, particularly for Andrew. Let's try and keep it to 8 or 9 minutes. We've got quite a few to get through. And we will have questions at the end of each session, but I may restrict those questions quite substantially in order that we get through the entire programme. Marieke van Rijden, I think you're there, aren't you? Would you like to introduce your session? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Yep. So I look after the assets and property portfolio on behalf of Waverley. And I've put together just the main services that we cover as part of that. The first thing to say is that there's 3 main areas that come under my remit. The first is asset management generally, which is looking after the land and property that the council owns. Just to be clear, that's the non-HRA, so not the housing portfolio. Engineering and building surveying is the second one, and then I've got facilities management as well. We were asked to provide the main staff that are involved in providing this service. So obviously you see myself at the top there. On the property management side, we've got Caroline Wallace, asset investment manager, and then Vicky Baisley, who is corporate asset manager, who's leaving actually on the 20th of August. So you've got her name there for the next few weeks. And then we've got Nick Laker, who looks after the building surveying and engineering side for his team. And lastly, Steve Holt, who's the facilities manager here at the Berries, mainly, which I'll come on to in a minute. So moving on to the next slide. So asset management, what do they do? Well, we've broken it down into sort of the day-to-day work, and then just to cover off with a couple of the projects that the team are involved in at the moment. And overall, the purpose really of that asset management function is to try anyway and deliver a corporate landlord model. So by that, it means that we know what all the assets are that the council owns, touch wood. We sort of run an asset register and we hold all the information on all of the leased assets as well, and provide that holistic view basically of the property portfolio. That team's also tasked with pursuing the asset investment side, making sure that we're getting value for money from the assets that the council owns. So they've constantly got an overview of that and an awareness to make sure we're doing that. The landlord function that's listed there, like I said, I've hinted at that the council has a number of leases and licenses and agreements basically with tenants and licensees, and that includes terms and conditions within those agreements that we have to abide to, and that team do the negotiations for the new leases, lease renewals, rent reviews, so provision that's in the leases to look at the rent and see whether we can get uplift depending on what the clause says in the lease. And they also deal with access requests, so that will be licenses allowing somebody temporary access, for example, or possibly sometimes longer term access if they've got a right of way, for example, across a piece of land. They deal with easements as well, so it's a sort of a right to have access, for example, or for utility companies, the Wayleaves, where they come to us and request permission to be able to go over council land. So the team negotiate all of those, quite a few these days. And the last point you can see there is the annual book valuations. Obviously, is an obligation to make sure that the values that are sitting in the accounts are correct, and there's some guidelines on how you value those, and we undertake annual valuations. So just by way of reference for anyone who's new to Waverley here, the kind of properties that the council own, operational properties that we also call land and buildings in the accounts, they're primarily there for service delivery. So obviously this property here, but we also have pavilions, memorial hall, museum, and various other functions that I'm sure you'll get to hear about over your time that the council operates from. And separate to that, the investment assets, obviously they're very important for our revenue income and also our capital gain. There's been some changes recently on being able to acquire new properties and the criteria that they might need to provide further than just providing annual a rental income. So we'll see how that goes over the next coming couple of years. They have office buildings and they generate an income for around 2 million, and the value, if you're interested in those investments, is around 37 million. Then, yeah, in terms of asset investment, there is a sort of coherent approach to how one can buy investments and look after the asset investments, including, you know, the wider aspect, not just acquisition, but also what money we spend on those assets. And that's set out in an asset investment strategy, which forms one of a suite of documents for the capital overriding capital strategy. That it says it there really, it provides the direction and how to support corporate priorities and make the best use of those council assets, whilst overall making sure that it meets the medium-term financial plan, that we're not overstepping our commitments in that financial plan. Some project examples there, just listing them out, so which I'm sure will be coming to this group over time. Way Court East in Farnham, which is a medical centre, doctor surgery that the council is committed to, well, hopefully committed to providing. We're just getting to the point of agreement for lease on that one. Fairground car park, it straddles over regeneration and obviously an asset aspect that's still in quite early stages. 69 High Street in Godalming, an asset that the council purchased here in the town here, and there's quite a lot of work going on that. And then there's obviously the Berries itself and looking to the future. Again, some of these straddle over into regeneration, so I don't think that's in this committee. Moving on then to property and engineering, so that's our building surveyors and engineers. There's quite a lot of detail there, but essentially they are the ones, as part of that corporate landlord model that I talked about, they're looking after making sure that the maintenance of those assets is up to scratch within the limitations that we might have for budget, but they do their best on that. They also look after the health and safety requirements, ensuring that we're compliant, for example, with asbestos, Legionella and fire. We do a lot of work with Surrey County Council. I've been to a few of these meetings now. It's really impressive work and communication that the team have with Surrey County Council, and having a joined up approach to looking at flood management. And there's been some projects on that, which we'll see in a minute. Yes, and they provide an out of hours flood response service as well. If there's an emergency, then they've got a process that they abide by for that. And lastly, some of the gritty stuff is maintaining some street furniture. We've got 90 bus shelters, a lot of which actually sit with parish council, and then street nameplates and bits and pieces like this that they repair and maintain. Same team also help out internal services with any aspect. I shall scoot over because I know that time's precious, but they keep a constant view of those assets through condition surveys, and they work with all services to make sure that we're providing their needs so far as possible. Some of the projects, I won't go through the whole list, but you can see that they work on car parks. They do a lot of work with green spaces and parks. We've been doing pavilions, quite a few pavilions. The work's been completed to refurbish them. I think there's still one to go. And then they work with housing as well on providing resurfacing of garages and car parks as well for the housing portfolio. Last of all, facilities management. I alluded to that earlier, that's looking after primarily the Berries. Got the caretaking and cleaning services that Steve and his team provide. They also look after the webcast here, the equipment that we've got in the chamber here. They also, Steve also does the fleet. That actually is a funny hybrid situation. While Steve works under my remit, actually Fleet's sitting in with another service, but he's still providing work for the fleet, and they've got some projects on that at the moment. Cleaning service on the next slide, just giving you a bit of information. It has been difficult retaining and recruiting cleaning staff actually, so that's a lot of work Steve's done to try and secure that and keep on top of that. They've been working with housing as well. We've come out of a couple of commitments that we've had up until recently. So cleaning of the offices at Farnham and toilet cleaning at Godalming. I think there's been some changes. If you need more detail, I can come back with that detail because I don't know it too well. And then, yeah, we've got some other facilities that we provide as well. So Steve team based here, looking after this building as their primary focus. The project examples that we've got here as well, they've done some power supply components here in the council chamber, just to give you an idea. Depot, they've been doing a lot of work clearing out the documentation. I think it was basically a storage facility for services in the past to be able to store their documents, but we're trying to move all of that and free that up. I've mentioned fleet, there's a project being looked at for additional cars for the building control team. And then on the second floor, this is a mix between the assets team and Steve's team to try and generate income on our top floor. So we've got a couple of interested parties looking to hopefully sign a lease up there. So we'll see how that goes. It's been marketed for a while, but that covers our 3 areas.
Thank you, Marika, for a very quick canter. Now, remember, there are a couple of things from all these things. You can think of areas that you perhaps want to bring to this committee in the future to think about, and 1 or 2 thoughts may have leapt out at you from that. We have got the opportunity to question officers in the Q4 performance area, and a lot of questions may come up there. But has anybody got any questions they just want to ask Marika right now on what we've just seen? Zoe?
Yeah. Can I check? You said you're struggling with recruiting cleaners. Are we insourcing or outsourcing cleaning?
Well, insourcing. We've got a full complement at the moment, I think. It's just that it's a vulnerable area that can change. So we've got the staff for that. But I know that's from having my one-to-ones with Steve, it is a challenge at times because it's only a few hours a day. So for a lot of them. So if somebody's off sick, then trying to source somebody in, then it can be agency work.
Okay, thank you. I think that's the one area where we can't have people working from home. Right, Lauren, last question, then we'll move on.
Thank you. I just want to check something. Am I correct that you said you have 37 million of investment assets that generate 2 million of income?
That's correct.
And they're commercial assets?
Yeah, they're mainly commercial. I should have said that earlier, but they're commercial assets, like industrial, office.
Why is the yield so bad?
Why
is the yield so bad on that when you would expect to be getting more income if you look at just general?
I'll come back to you if you like
Okay.
on that. I haven't got that answer straight away. Thank you.
Okay, Lauren, that the asset investment or the asset management and asset investment strategy is something which you might want to suggest we bring to the committee to look at, and that would be we can go right through then just how things happen and what the yield is and how it's calculated. So you might make a note of that for the future as well. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let us move on straight away then to communications and customer services. Nicola.
Hi, yep, so I'm Nicola, I'm the Executive Head of Communications and Customer Services. I'm just going to wait for Lola to... Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm the Executive Head of Communication and Customer Services. So the areas that come under me are customer services, communications and engagement, ICT and business systems, digital services, and complaints and ombudsman complaints as well. So it's all right. Right. Yep. So that. Yep. So high level structure in terms of my team. So it's me up there. I've got Linda, who is our IT manager, Helen, who manages our customer services team, and Ian, who's the communications manager. Digital services, the staff who support that sit a bit sort of hybrid. Some of them are in IT, some of them are in business transformation, which is why there's not a manager name up there, because they're not a team on their own. And complaints sits under customer services now as well. So a bit of a higher level overview. So our key aims really as a service are that we provide excellent customer services to residents through all the routes of contact they have with us, that we grow a digital first approach so that we're empowering residents to access our service digitally at a place and time that works for them. We provide a secure, robust ICT provision that supports the needs of the council, and that we provide people-centric internal and external comms. So a bit more information on the teams. So customer services, they are the first point of contact. That can be for general inquiries, housing queries, planning, environmental services, elections, care line queries, and that is phone, email, online, and in reception as well. And they also provide a post and scanning support service to the organisation as well. That just gives you a bit of an idea of the kind of volumes that we get in over the last couple of years in terms of calls and emails, and sort of average answer speeds for the last few years as well. The complaints side of things, there are 3 stages to the complaints. So stage 1 complaints are done by our service complaint administrators across the organisation, and we will help and support them with that. The stage 2 and the ombudsman complaints are supported by our complaints officer in the organisation as well. So we provide quite a high level of support to the organisation for those kind of complaints, and obviously anything from the ombudsman for housing and local government and social care as well. ICT team, so they deliver a programme each year that looks to maintain and enhance our IT infrastructure and applications. They also ensure that we have got support and backups in place to minimise risk of disruption in case anything happens. And they also are responsible for ensuring that we are resilient against any risk of cyber attacks or anything similar to that as well. They also make sure that we can operate effectively both on site and remotely as well, as part of the hybrid working. And they support services with changes and upgrades to their specific service systems that they have. They're also supported with the transition towards being able to offer a more digital route for our customers. And they provide a support with any ICT issues through the service desk, that's for both staff and can be for councillors as well. And down the bottom shows the kind of volumes of requests they get logged. That is just requests that are logged. It doesn't include any phone calls they get or any walk-ups either to support them. So it's a bit of a higher level overview of what they do. In terms of digital, so our aim is to provide customers with an online option that they can use at a time and place that suits them, and access the front door into the council. And we're aiming to be digital first, not digital by default. And what I mean by that is that we will offer a digital service, but that doesn't mean that that's the only option that we offer to residents. So we're not looking to go down the route of some big companies where you get charged like an admin fee if you try and do something over the phone. That's not what we're looking at, but we do want to encourage digital first options. At the moment, our main digital routes are via the website and online forms. That gives you a bit of an idea of the stats in terms of website visitors over the past 6 months. What's been interesting in the last 6 months is it's the first time that mobile phones has been the main device used to access the Waverley website. And just to be clear, these stats do exclude Waverley staff who are accessing it via the network. So it's not us looking at it all day long doing our work. It is customers visiting it. But obviously we're getting quite high levels of visitors, and it's very interesting that we flipped that mobile phones are now the main way to view our website. And last but not least, communications team. So they do everything external and internal. So external comms will be press releases, public engagement on major projects, press inquiries, the social media side of things. And they also help support on the website as well. And they also do our internal comms, so internet, emails, the fortnightly staff newsletter, and they'll support services as well with any key messages and comms that they need to be getting out. And that's us.
Thank you very much indeed. Any questions? Many of the complaints we can talk about in the performance reports in the next item, if we wish. Are there any other questions? Zoe, yes.
It seems to me all of this data is so interesting and professionally put together, but I think all of us would be able to add a lot more value if the key statistics that you're giving, which are fantastic, I mean, they're so carefully put together, but it seems to me we would be able to better understand them if we then had a comparison with how we're doing compared nationally or in Surrey. So when we look at waiting times for your phone calls, I don't know whether what you showed there was good or not. And I think, and likewise, the return on investment, or if we look at the staff turnover, you know, all of those key data points, and it looks good. But for us to add value, we need to see how it compares, either at the Surrey level or at the national level.
So, yeah, we can provide some of that. So some of it will be, we have to look at what other councils publish. There's not necessarily a big whole report that summarises it nicely, but we can certainly look at trying to pull some of that information out for you and share it. It's fine.
Just one question from me on the digital points. Does that include the planning area, including all the visits to planning? Because I must have several hundred visits to the planning application to inquire of planning applications and the like every year.
So obviously the aim is the more we can get and offer a digital option, we will do. We're still working through various things. I would have to get the specifics on planning for you and update you. I don't know.
Is planning included in the numbers that you gave us?
Oh, for the website? I will double check for you and confirm.
Because that, if it's not in there, that would add a very substantial number to it.
Yes, I will double check.
Thank you. Andrew?
You made a reference to your digital strategy. Clearly, once you start to make digital your first point of call, you're potentially excluding a large percentage of the residents. Do you have any information on those people who are not digital literate and therefore finding it a problem?
So that's the difference between digital first and digital default. We are not stopping other routes of contact into the council. We still have the phone, we still have reception, we still have other ways of contacting us. A lot of people do things online now. There's a huge shift to do that, but that doesn't mean we stop other routes into the council. It's still in a relatively early phase in the Waverley side, but yeah, we would not be at a point where we will ever stop residents who are not digitally enabled for whatever reason from being able to reach our services. That will never be the goal.
Do you have any information, idea as a percentage of all your calls of those people who are struggle and will never become digitally comfortable?
Not off the top of my head, but I can have a chat and see if we can find out for you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I mean, digital and IT strategy may be something which, again, members may want to bring to the committee in the future to discuss more widely. But let us move on, if I may. Legal and Democratic Services. Oh, Susan, you are there. Sorry, you were hiding. Right. Thank you very much, Susan Sale.
Thank you. So I'm Susan Sale. I'm the Executive Head of Legal and Democratic Services. I'll just give Layla a minute to bring the slides up. So the areas within Legal and Democratic Services are the legal team, which is headed up by an interim borough solicitor who just started this week, actually, called Mark Watkins. The Democratic Services team headed up on an interim basis by Fiona Cameron. And then the Electoral Services team and the manager there is Shaylee Gibb, and the Executive Support team, where the team leader there is Rebecca Noak. So if I just give you a little bit of a high-level overview of legal to start with. The in-house legal team provides legal support to the council as a whole. We do also externalise legal work on occasions where necessary, but we try to keep as much of the work in-house as possible. We provide advice and support to all of the council functions, and the role is to support the council collectively and act to promote the organisation's best interests at all times. So that can include advising the full body of the council, as well as committees and individual members in respect of their councillor roles. And the legal advice that's given is always, of course, non-political advice. It's very important that advice is always independent and politically impartial. And we don't advise members of the public on legal matters, nor councillors when acting in their personal capacity, although we are quite often asked to do so. So the areas within legal are the property team. We have 2 property lawyers, and they deal with acquisitions, sales, leases and related transactions on all of the council owned assets, land and buildings. We have 3 planning lawyers who give advice to the planning committee, and they draft and negotiate Section 106 agreements, deal with planning enforcement work, and defend judicial review challenges to our planning decisions. Then we have one contracts lawyer who secures contracts for all suppliers of goods, services and construction, and one litigation lawyer who deals with any prosecutions brought on behalf of the council, supporting enforcement and regulatory functions and defending any claims that might be brought against the council. Then the legal team also encompasses the information governance team, where there are 2 officers who deal with data protection and freedom of information requests and environmental information requests, securing the council's compliance and supporting all services in dealing with information requests. The next team is the Democratic Services team. The team consists of the Democratic Services Manager, a Senior Governance Officer, a Scrutiny Officer, and 2 Democratic Services Officers. Their role is to support the council's democratic processes, primarily decision-making arrangements involving elected members, and that includes servicing a whole range of meetings, which can include the full council meeting, committees, subcommittees, working groups, joint management team and CMB as well sometimes. And they provide advice and support to members and officers to ensure arrangements satisfy requirements of the council's governance arrangements, so providing support on constitutional provisions, etc., and governance arrangements for decision making. The Democratic Services team also support the overview and scrutiny function and support this particular committee. So recently the scrutiny role has moved into legal and democratic services within Democratic Services team. And there is a dedicated scrutiny officer role, which is currently vacant, but we're in the middle of a recruitment process at the moment and interviewing 3 strong candidates next week. So we hope to be appointing a scrutiny officer very shortly. The scrutiny officer will support this committee's work to fulfil their statutory role and to overall make a positive contribution to the work of the council. It's important to note that the scrutiny officer role is not statutory, but having a statutory function is mandatory for this council because we operate the strong leader model and the executive model. Then the other aspect of democratic services is providing member support. So really they're the first port of call with any signposting to anywhere else within the council. They provide assistance with IT, deal with members' allowances and expenses, and a very robust programme of induction training and refresher training throughout the year. Then the electoral services team, they deal with registration, so they're responsible for keeping the electoral register up to date and complete throughout the year. They do that by undertaking an annual canvass in the autumn time, and they publish the register annually in December of every year, and throughout the year make amendments to it. They're also obviously responsible for the elections themselves. That's the responsibility of the returning officer, and the elections team support that function. They run all polls within the borough, and that can include parliamentaries, police and crime commissioner, county, borough, parish or town councils, neighbourhood planning referendums, the bid ballots and parish polls as well. They also, beyond the elections, they deal with boundary reviews, and there's recently been a Waverley Borough Council boundary review, the county one and the parliamentary one, community governance reviews, polling district reviews, and at the moment there's been a major piece of work around changes to legislation brought in by the Elections Act, some of which came into force in May for our election process this year, but several other provisions that are coming in over the next few months. And then last but by no means least is the executive support team, which is a shared service between Waverley and Guildford, and the executive support team is there to provide support to senior officers, including chief executive directors and the heads of service, but also including the leaders and the mayor at Waverley as well. And their role is to provide a broad remit across the 2 councils. Since it's become a joint management team, I think those officers require additional support really, because they've now got a much busier role. They deal with arranging meetings, dealing with correspondence, inboxes, and any administrative work to support those officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Any questions for Susan? Jerome and then Andy.
Thank you, Chairman. Boundary changes, Waverley. You're talking with Surrey. Are you starting to talk with East Hampshire?
Yes, absolutely. So for the next election process, there will be some changes to the way that we do things. It's a slightly more complex picture now because we will be taking in and giving to other authority areas in our elections process, and that's already being planned. But actually it's a common picture across the country that is quite a regular occurrence that we take in or give to other authorities, and there's a clear process around how we'll be doing that.
So all prepared for an election at the end of this year?
Well, always prepared, because the general can be called at 25 days notice. So yes, always prepared.
Or in January 2025, Jerome. Yes, of course, it's made more complex by the fact that the boundary commission for the constituencies didn't talk to the boundary commissions for the local authorities. So we've got some wards which are cut in half now, which just makes life more complicated. Jolly good, terrific. Andy.
Thank you, Chairman. It strikes me, Susan, I just ask you if I'm correct in this, that some of the areas that you're responsible for have got more potential for sharing between Waverley and Guildford than some other areas that we've been hearing about. Is that a fair comment? Not moving down from the executive level to the levels below, sharing at these levels. Is that fair that in your area, perhaps a bit more potential for that than some other areas?
Through you, Chair, that might well be the case. I think I can't really comment on other service areas, but I do feel with legal and democratic services that there probably are opportunities there for alternative delivery models, whether that be shared services or other arrangements. But certainly with legal, it would be an option very much worth considering. And as I say, the executive support team has already become a shared service in effect. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Susan, very much indeed. It's a very important area, but I think probably a little more straightforward than for most of us than most of the other areas, perhaps. The most straightforward of all, of course, is finance. Peter, doubtless you're going to take us through in double quick time.
Thank you, Chair. I'll give you a quick trot through what the remit looks like. So outside of the direct finance remit, I look after housing benefits as a service. So that's dealing with about 3,500 caseload, which is decreasing year on year by a couple of hundred cases a year because of universal credit switching over for people of working age. So in financial terms, that equates to circa £19 million worth of benefit being paid out across the borough. So the split between the working age and the pension age is probably 50-50 of that caseload. And there's probably about 700-ish of the caseload are our own tenants on some level of benefit. They're not all on full benefit, but they're all, that's within that 700, there's a degree of amount of benefit. The size of the team, there's 8 full-time equivalents in the team. So there's 1 manager, and 2 supervisors, a couple of technical posts around the Civica system. And the rest of it are on the front line dealing with the cases and dealing with the public. Moving on, the Revs team, which is the council tax and the business rates team. So their function is to levy council tax and business rates on circa probably 57,000 dwellings in the borough, rounding it up. And there's around about 3,000 odd businesses that are eligible to pay business rates at a rateable value of just over 100 million a year. In financial metrics, we raise 31 million in council tax and we retain 13 of that. The rest of it goes to predominantly to county, and about 10 million-ish goes to police. there's of the 127 million that we raise in housing in business rates, we retain 3 million. County get a small proportion of that. The rest of it goes to central government. And that's what we call retained business rates, to put a face on it. Paul shaking his head. We've retained it, yes. Yeah, we've retained not much of it. And so the story carries on. So there's 11 people in that team, and part of the function of that team is to maintain what we call the tax base itself, to ensure that all the dwellings that are eligible to pay council tax are accurately reflected. The valuation office actually tell us who and which dwellings have, well, not who, but which dwellings have to be levied, and it's our job to administer that in line with what they tell us, and then make sure we're accurately billing and then promptly collecting that money to support the local government function. I also look after procurement. So that's all about compliance with the contract procedure rules, ensuring we're achieving value for money in everything that we buy, from all the big contract stuff like the new leisure service provision that's just come into place, having a new contractor, to the minutiae of what gets purchased through the spending of the authority. Our general fund is circa £30 million a year of gross expenditure, outside of things like housing benefit, which clearly isn't a procurement issue. And our housing revenue account spends in the region of probably upwards of £40 million a year in total, in all of its programs. And all of that's dealt with through procurement. We have to comply with our regulations. Also look after insurance. So we have an insurance contract now with London Borough of Sutton. That changed about 2.5 years ago. We were with Zurich, and we were seeing exponential increases in premiums year on year, circa 30% a year. Clearly it wasn't a sustainable position. London Borough Sutton provide literally a different insurance offer to Zurich. So it's a pooled fund of all the London boroughs and 8 Surrey authorities and a couple of others outside of Surrey, where we all pay into one pool, and there is self-insurance up to the first £250,000 for any claim, and then they have underwritten policies that it goes out to from there. In metrics for this authority, it meant that when we cut over to Sutton, we saved circa £150 million in real budget terms, and we've probably avoided upwards of 300 in the thousand in the 2.5 years or so that we've been with Sutton now, because we haven't been affected by the increase in the insurance market. In fact, we've had a reduction year on year since we joined Sutton. And that to a big degree reflects our claim position, as in we're not a big claim generator as far as the pooled fund's concerned. And that's a really good win for Waverley, and it's a good place to be. And we need to make sure we carry on with that. One of the big functions we do, so I look after the finance function. I've got a team of 11 in FTE terms. So we deal with everything to do with financial management. So it's the capital, the housing revenue account, it's collection fund. We've got several trusts that we look after. It's all the general fund spend. So there's all the financial management that goes with that. It's all the budgeting, the actual accounting, there's reporting to government, there's statutory accounts. So we have to produce accounts to UK GAAP compliance, international accounting standards. There's a whole host of things, all the government grant returns that we have to do. It's a busy team for 11 people. They're under pressure, but they are a fantastic team that really work well. And they work well together. As was pointed out a bit earlier, it's retention. And then there's me, strategic finance. So I don't tend to be involved in the day-to-day. I don't particularly get near that. They wouldn't allow me to. I don't think they feel I'm competent enough to manage the finances. So I deal with all the strategic stuff instead. And I'm half-time posted because I'm shared with Guildford. So you'll often see me in these arenas, but you'll also see the finance manager and her understudy. So it's Rosie and Candace, or the face of Waverley, to be fair. And you'll usually see them when it comes to the detail sitting around the table. And you know, that's it's an accolade to them and their ability in their own finance remit. So just something else I wanted to pick up on around Marika's area. We were asking about investment property. So we've got 42 investment commercial properties in total. So I think there's 38 of them were legacy, as in it's something that this authority's had since 1972, as in, you know, previous reincarnations of local government. They ended up with us. And then the rest is what we've actually invested in over the last however many years, which aren't many. There's only 5 investments that have been made in the time I've been around. So their overall value, there's 33 million, which is currently tenanted. We've got one that we're negotiating in the NHS at the moment, which we're literally signing up on the just negotiating the overall lease deal, and that's over in Farnham, Waycourt East. It's commercially sensitive, so I'll not put anything on the table other than the return's about 4.5, and that reflects the overall portfolio return, which is 4.5. Our top yield is just shy of 10%, and our lowest yield is 4.02%. In pure money terms, this year it's 1.785 million. And when we're fully tenanted, which is literally only a matter of another, well, few weeks away, really, that yield will go up to, well, the overall income will be about 2.2 million on that portfolio. I can't get into any more than that because we'll have to go into exempt to discuss these figures. It's commercially sensitive, but that's just a flavour of what the numbers are actually looking like on commercial. Okay.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. Any questions? Zoe.
So this is a classic example of where I think we should agree on certain key parameters, which we then need to compare across Surrey, like number of staff to administer this amount of money. I don't know whether 11 is a good thing or a bad thing. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a number. And then, for example, the number of staff to administer X number of houses. Again, the return on investment question. But so for us to be able to do our jobs, I think we should all agree that there are certain key parameters when we're getting these fabulous, assiduously put together reports. But for us to do our job, we need to see how it compares with other councils, let's say in Surrey, not nationwide, but let's say in Surrey. And that's a classic example of where it would have felt.
Okay, good point. Peter?
So, Chair, absolutely great point made, and there's a lot of value in benchmarking, as you describe. And that's really important in where Waverley's about to go with its finances. So Waverley over the autumn needs to go through a service review to understand the direction of travel on its service provision, particularly around the collaboration, where we are looking to collaborate on our services, because that's a very key building block of delivering savings within our medium-term strategy in Waverley. There is a big caveat, though, to benchmarking when you get hold of the numbers, and that's to understand the detail of who's counted what into which number. You can't look at two authorities on face value and say, okay, they're comparable, because there's a lot of minutiae of detail in there that makes a big difference. For instance, I include procurement and exchequer within my finance team figures, but other authorities won't do that. They'll have it elsewhere. Guildford certainly doesn't have that in its finance numbers, so you couldn't directly compare. We'd have to do a lot of digging to get that comparability. Doesn't mean to say it shouldn't be done.
Agreed. I view that as a second order problem. The first order problem is that for us to do our jobs, we should be benchmarking.
Thank you. That's a good point to take up with the Local Government Association, because they have tried to benchmark for many years. It's something worth doing, but it's a very serious point, but it's a very challenging thing to do. Paul, do you want to come in?
Just to add, the Department for Levelling Up Communities and Local Government, well, I never remember the acronym, it changes so often, have just sent a letter, as Michael gave a couple of days ago, making it clear that they were going to be introducing a number of metrics to ensure councils can be directly compared with each other across local authority boundaries. They've issued an initial set of metrics, which certainly I would be very keen for this committee to give an opinion on, because some of those metrics are a little curious. But just to expand on a point that Peter made, I mean, for example, if you were looking at the number of staff it took to administer our social housing and you compared that to another borough without looking at whether the mix was more urban or rural or various other things, that would be a completely inappropriate stat to compare across two boroughs. So they've stressed to us that we are not returning to the Audit Commission, but the fact that they said that 3 times within the letter does make a number of us give some pause. So I'm sure that I will share that letter, if he hasn't already had it, with the chairman of this committee so that he can share it with you guys for a look.
Thank you. That would be very useful. Well, just a quick point, Zoe.
Again, that's a second order problem. Okay, so let's keep the big picture here, which is the need for benchmarking. But secondly, one could start gradually, just look at the top figures and then we get build down. We don't need to boil the ocean. Just start with the top most important figures, benchmark it with the rest of Surrey, then we can do our job in scrutinizing. Otherwise, it's all just numbers.
The point is really well made. It's a very important point, but a lot of people have been trying to do that for a lot of years and so far failed. No, I buy that entirely. But this is a really good example of something to take up with the LGA and Michael Gove. Well, you'd have to go through and make sure that the accounting techniques used by every single borough are pretty much identical in order to measure them properly. Even just doing that would be a monstrous business because everyone would expect everybody else to conform to the way they do it. And that would be just one example. And each borough actually is remarkably different, as Guildford and Waverley are finding at the moment.
Yeah, I've just met with Tom. He's already doing it with the other CEOs. Yeah. So, let's just keep the big picture and benchmark at the high level.
Chairman, if I may, on that point, that's a good point there, because benchmarking does happen across Surrey anyway. So perhaps one of the questions, and you'll see some of that benchmarking information is picked up within the quarterly reports that come into this committee. You can always build in more benchmarking. I think we probably should. And in terms of the reference you made there, Chair, to the Local Government Association and the point that the leader made, we need to have a good look at this new data explorer that the government has launched as part of this new process for the Office for Local Government and see what use that will be to the council. I think it will be useful to the council, but I think we need to work with it carefully to make sure that we're not just slavishly using all of the stats within it. We need to use it in a way that works for us.
From the chair, if I may, can I suggest then that we do bring back into a future meeting. We will certainly need to look at the autumn services review and the move towards the further collaboration. And as a part, and also we need to look at Michael Gove's request for comparative data into which we can build the benchmarking. That would be something which I think we could put into the forward agenda. If we probably need more meetings at this point. Andrew, you want to come in?
Thank you. I just want to question, you were talking about you inherited, well, the council has inherited 38 properties since 1972. So there's obviously a long legacy of property ownership. What is the strategy of investment in properties going forward?
So we don't, the council no longer invests in property for commercial return for yield. HM Treasury stopped that in December 22. So we no longer make investments for that purpose. We now invest on the basis of regeneration and housing, where yield can be part of that, but it's not the purpose of the investment.
And Spelthorne and Woking leap to mind. So, okay, I'm going to draw that to a good close. There is lots of good stuff that we can look at in that we can add to our future lists for consideration. Thank you very much, Peter. Let's move on now to Andrew, and it is Andrew, Housing Services.
It is. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
You did say, could I keep to 8 minutes? I'll try my best. Doing a slightly different form of presentation for councillors tonight, but just to introduce Waverley's housing service to you. It's a whole service overview. The service sets a range of housing strategies. The council adopted a main housing strategy last April with some exciting new proposals. We have a homelessness strategy that will come to this committee later in the year. We have a housing options and homelessness team that provide advice about homes and prevent homelessness. We are the local authority in Surrey with the lowest number of households in bed and breakfast and in temporary accommodation. There are reasons for that. A very high performing team, but also, again, comparing sort of apples and pears can be quite difficult, but we've got a very good track record for that. We provide homes, we build our own through the housing revenue account with our housing development team. We've built about 160 since the programme started in 2012, and there's about a couple of hundred in the programme going forward. We manage and maintain our tenancies, that is the people who live in our houses. They make the homes, we look after them, we support them, we make sure that the tenancy agreements are fit for purpose. And we are finding as well that we have more and more vulnerable tenants. And that may be something this committee wants to look at, how we resource, how we support, how we care for the tenants that we have that are increasingly vulnerable, particularly when adult social care is raising the barrier, its thresholds higher and higher. So our housing officers are mental health workers, they're safeguarding experts, you name it, they're having to do it. And they're doing it very well. We manage and maintain the homes. So we look after the properties that we own, about nearly 5,000. I'll show you a slide on that in a minute. And we support tenant engagement. That's highly important. We have developed that work over the years. We have the Landlord Services Executive Working Group, formerly the Landlord Services Advisory Board, which contains members, contains representatives from the tenants panel and also other tenants as well, and that's working extremely well. Our aim is to be the best council landlord in the South East. If I was in Guildford, I'd say for Guildford, our aim is to be the best council landlord in the South East. That's what we want to be, and we want to provide safe, warm, high quality, energy efficient and affordable homes, providing the services and support that our tenants need. Now, I hinted at that a moment ago. Our new homes that we're building on council land achieve the highest energy rating, and our service is financially robust so that we can support the services we need to keep it running. Please forgive the 757 and the 257. That should be 750 and 250. It's a slide I inherited from somebody else. On our housing register, it fluctuates. It's around 1,000. And we will house around 200 households a year, and around 200 households join the register every year. And that is just the very same year on year. Applicants not living in social housing make up 75%, those wanting a transfer, 25%. What kind of homes have we got? We've got senior living, we've got homes built prior to 1945. We have homes built between 1945 and 1964 and post 1974. We have a stock condition survey, major piece of work going on at the moment to assess the condition of our stock and what we need to do with it. We have flats, we have bungalows as well. There's some percentages for you. Our tenant profile, I won't go through all the percentages. Interesting though, that 40% of our tenants receive no benefit at all, because people tend to think that council housing contains people on benefits. 40% are not on benefits. It's a very, very good tenure for those on moderate incomes who want to live and work in the borough. Average rents, 1, 2, 3, 4-bed homes, and that gives you the rents. And you can see they are substantially lower than you'll pay on the open market. How is £1 of every rent money spent? Again, I won't go through that, but you can see that's split up. 9p goes to building new homes, 21p to operational management costs, and so on and so forth. And so that is the HRA's ring fenced. It's tenants' money. It can only be spent on our housing. Big ticket item for this committee is the regulator of social housing has longer and sharper teeth than ever before, which is a good thing. And there's a whole piece of work that has come out of the tenants' charter, which I will, having flicked that, in terms of how the home is maintained, the tenancy is maintained, what goes on in the neighbourhood and the community, how tenants are involved and are at the heart of our landlord service, and the new tenants and the new tenant satisfaction measures. That came out of the Charter for Social Housing Residents. I won't read through the list. That was triggered by the Grenfell disaster and the need for social housing to be properly regulated, and as I say, the tenants to be at the heart of what I'm doing. I'm whizzing through here and poor old Layla can't keep up with me. So I'm very sorry about that, Layla, but I'm sure that the committee are getting it. Hope so anyway. Final slide, 22 tenant satisfaction measures that we've got to look at. We will be inspected as a housing authority at some point. And these are the areas, and they all make massive sense. Keeping properties in good repair, maintaining health and safety is the most important thing that we can do for our tenants. Respectful and helpful engagement. We did a piece of work through this committee, a very successful piece of work on stigma in social housing. This committee, or its subsets, has a history of making an enormously valuable contribution to our housing service, and I want that to continue. And responsible neighbourhood management. We're seeing increasing antisocial behaviour and long-term neighbourhood disputes. How do we address that carefully, properly, and to try to deal with those issues before they become almost unmanageable? And then effective handling of complaints. You will see from the corporate performance report, and you can ask me about it, we have a lot of complaints and they have gone up, and there's been a bit of a perfect storm on that, but we can talk about that later on. That's my whistle-stop tour, Chairman. I could talk for hours about this, but I won't tonight. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed. I should mention to members that in the past, until 2 or 3 years ago, there was a housing scrutiny committee all of its own. That was changed. We now have a landlord services executive working group, which has a very different remit, which is an arm of the executive in that sense. It helps the executive. We have become the scrutiny function for housing. Housing is a big area, and it probably warrants a scrutiny board all of its own, but it doesn't. It forms part of this committee. So are there any questions that anybody has got for Andrew? Laura.
Thank you, Chair. On this slide, you mentioned that 14p goes to programmed maintenance. So I guess that is improvements, planned improvements.
Yes.
And then 19% on repairs.
Yes.
So that's 33%, and industry standard is around 10%. So that's really high as well.
I couldn't comment on that in terms of social housing. I would have to look at that. It depends what you mean by industry standard. I don't know. I would have to look at other councils that have stock, particularly when stock is very old. It would need to be compared as well with housing associations, but not so much with the private sector. It's very different.
Yeah, I have an RP, a for-profit RP, and I have a legacy portfolio along with the rest. And I would say that 33% is particularly high, but I think that's worth looking at, because just because you're a local authority, we shouldn't just accept worse performance than the private sector, in my opinion.
No, it's fair.
Thank you. Andy?
Thank you, Chairman. Andy, this area seems so important to me, actually, in Waverley, particularly because the multiple between wages and house prices in Waverley is the highest in the country outside of London. It's a multiple of 18, which causes all sorts of problems in the planning area. I just wonder, the government, the current government and any future government will probably want to encourage more social housing, in my view. They're all showing indications of that. Do you think that will provide opportunities for Waverley to do more if we get more support from this government or any future government?
Councillor, I am an optimist. I hope so. I think we are looking at some serious issues, though, with affordable housing delivery due to the issues around build cost inflation. Huge numbers of disrepair claims, a whole of the damp and mould issue. Housing associations are retreating on their development programs because they literally have to set their house in order. Now, I'm hoping that this government and future administrations will invest in capital grant funding, because that is the way to get new homes built. The government introduced the affordable rent, 80% of market value, so that housing associations, housing providers could sort of borrow commercially, and then housing benefit would meet the higher rent. That that hasn't worked, and that's been recognised across the political spectrum really, that we need to build more socially rented homes. In Waverley, we set a Waverley rent, which is kind of mid between the social rent and the affordable rent that works in terms of viability, and housing association partners that we are working with are agreeing to set the Waverley rent, which means it is more affordable to those on the housing register. I'd love to say we can see a great explosion in supply, but I don't know. I think we're going to have to wait and see.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. This is a very big area, and it will certainly be a very important part of our focus in the next 4 years. So thank you to Andrew for that. Let's move on now to organisational development, if we may, and Robin Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. So organisational development, the vision for the service is for it to be a hub for change, strategy and improvement across the two councils. I've listed the functions there that are undertaken by organisational development. Important to recognise that not all of those relate to exact teams. So in some cases it does. We have a human resources function, we have a human resources team. In some aspects, these are new areas of focus, for example, programme management, risk management. There isn't an individual team that is delivering that function, but it's delivered by a number of different officers in different parts of the council. So worth bearing that in mind. So I'll run through each of those. If we can go through those, please. Thank you. So strategy, policy and performance. It's exactly what I think you would expect it is. This is about how we set our plans and our strategies for the organisation, including our corporate strategy. So it's about how we plan. It's about reviewing the delivery against those plans. It's about managing our performance, monitoring our performance, having discussions in committees such as these, and then ultimately seeking to improve our performance as an organisation. So it encompasses plans and strategy, service planning and performance monitoring. And actually all of those functions you'll see being discussed within this committee. We also look after equality, diversity, inclusion in terms of our statutory functions, but also in terms of the choices made by this authority to set its own equality, diversity and inclusion objectives and to pursue those on behalf of the public. So moving on to the next slide, please. Business transformation is the next function under organisational development. This is us reviewing how we do our business as an organisation and where necessary transforming. And there certainly is a need to transform how we do business across the piece to deliver financial value for the council, but also non-financial value. Part of what we do is maximising the potential use of digital technologies. Picking up on Nicola's point earlier, there's a very important overlap between the work of the business transformation team, the work of the comms team and the work of the IT team, and we make sure that we try and keep those dots joined together. Point 4 there is managing our information and our data well. Alongside our money and our staff, information is another key asset that we have, and we need to make sure that we manage it well. And so within the past couple of years, we've recruited an information manager, and she's leading a whole bundle of work to try and improve the way that we do manage our information and our data as an organisation. One of the key points about business transformation is making sure we learn from the input from others. So when we undertake business services reviews, where we'll ask the customer their views, we will ask colleagues and also councillors and try to weave that into the transformational work that we do. Moving on to the next one, climate reduction. This council declared a climate emergency and it put in place a climate neutrality action plan. And the core function of the climate and sustainability team is to deliver on that climate neutrality action plan. Clearly a big piece of work, very stretching, both in terms of what we do and also trying to find the funding to do it. So one of the things the team actually does is tries to leverage in funding pots that are available for local authorities and make sure that we make full use of that. So this is about looking at our own operations and the impact that this council's operations as an organisation has on the environment. But it's also about working as part of a network of public service providers across the local area. And I've given some examples there under point 4 in terms of our electric vehicle strategy, trying to generate electricity through solar, cycle routes, local infrastructure. So we need to make sure that we play an important part in those discussions which are ongoing within Surrey, and also to provide community leadership. And that's where it's important that we particularly take a councillor steer on this area of work. Next slide, please. So Project and program management and assurance, this, as I say, is a cross-cutting discipline. It's a sort of new area of focus. This is really all about supporting and coordinating program and project management across the whole organisation and making sure that we take a consistent approach. So all those things you see listed at the bottom, which you would expect to see in an organisation in terms of supporting project startup, planning for projects, making sure that we have a business case for pieces of work before we do it, managing our risks and our issues and consistently reporting on it. That's one of the areas of work by the service. Next slide is about risk management and business continuity. Risk management is obviously about identifying the risks that we face as a council, talking about what the impact and likelihood of those risks will be if we don't manage them, trying to assess what they will be if we do manage them in the way that we plan to, identifying what the residual risk is and how that can be responded to, whether it's something that we specifically can reduce, whether we transfer it, whether we accept it. So it's all about having a discussion about what our risk appetite is as an organisation, making sure we're tracking those risks, making sure we're talking about that. Business continuity obviously goes hand in hand with emergency planning as a discipline within the council. And it's about making sure that we have good, robust plans in place so that when things do go wrong, we have the plans ready to deal with them and keep our essential functions going. That's our service management structure. So you met John earlier, he's the interim human resources manager. Yasmin Makin is our business transformation manager. Our sustainability manager is actually out to adverts, and that advert closed today. A number of applications, and look forward to interviewing for that post. And our corporate policy manager currently vacant, and I'll be able to report back to you in the future on that post. So we have a number of challenges, some of which have already come up in this meeting. It's a difficult time to recruit and retain staff, and in particular, local government across the piece has an issue with an ageing workforce and an issue with succession planning. And so all of the questions raised earlier in terms of how we induct new employees and how we inspire them to stay within the council and support them are actually really important. Clearly, we've got an issue around cost of living that affects our contracts. My particular focus around HR is the impact it has on staff. Clearly, it has a major impact on staff, and that's something we've been hearing about when we've been talking to staff. As an overall point at point 3 there, expectations are up and rising, and resources are continually reducing, and that's a challenge for us. We have opportunities, however, as well as those challenges. We have an opportunity, particularly around HR and our workforce strategies. Our current HR strategy is due to expire at the end of this year. So actually, we have that opportunity to review it. A lot has changed since we first put it in place and consider how we need to change it. We've had various references to the collaboration with Guildford Borough Council. There's an opportunity there and one that we need to do properly. And there are also opportunities to collaborate with other organisations and other councils to try to release some efficiencies from working together, and also to perhaps have a best of both approach where we do join together functions in the future. So the priorities on the next slide. We're looking in the next year and over the next 3 years to deliver a programme of business transformation, which needs to bridge the council's budget gap, create resilient public services, and utilise digital technology. We need to get the financial and non-financial benefits out of any collaboration that we do with Guildford Borough Council. We need to deliver the climate change action plan that we already have in place, develop a new workforce strategy, and part of that workforce strategy will be our approach to agile working, all the things we were discussing earlier, and then a whole range of stuff around organisational development, particularly around how we plan strategically, particularly around the policies that we hold, and how we manage performance improvement across the council. On the next slide, I just listed my own thoughts about how this committee could add value to the work of organisational development, and I think that it can. The first thing I would say is we really welcome pre-decision scrutiny from this committee. In terms of organisational development, we've said various times there are big questions to be answered and big decisions for the organisation to take. So those are decisions for our executive under our model of governance. But I would really welcome, and I know the executive would really welcome as well, your input and your pre-decision scrutiny as a committee. Tell us what you think. You might want to look at shifting the focus from generalized view of performance to specific areas. This organisation has a huge number of functions that we deliver. So although you can look at performance in a generalized way across the piece, that's actually quite challenging for you to do. And perhaps one thing you might want to do is focus in on, zoom in on particular areas, and then get to grips with those areas a little bit more. It's already been mentioned that we're going to have business transformation and collaboration activity. I think there's a really important role for this committee to scrutinise that as we go through. And exploring the impact of future national, local policy trends and sector issues. We already mentioned the new government office and the data explorer, and I think that will be helpful to have a look at the opportunities that offers in terms of benchmarking. And that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for Robin?
It's more of an observation, really. I agree with you, Robin, that the focusing on business transformation, I think, is key and something which we should focus on as a group. I see that from, I think, your slide number 3, action is important for us to ensure that we're getting the most out of our collaboration journey. From my own personal perspective, I find it somewhat opaque. And I think it would help us to understand, and also to help the executive probably understand more as to where we can get some significant benefits from the collaboration strategy that we have adopted. And that is through business transformation, I feel, to actually make the organizational changes which are necessary to get the most out of collaboration. And I'd like to see that more on our agenda, if I may, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to come back on that, Robin?
Well, only to say happy to, and to make the point that the collaboration initiative, in whichever direction it goes, is, you know, a whole team approach for the whole of the joint management team. There's a particular role for the transformation team and for other parts of organizational development, but it is a whole team approach from the joint management team.
Thank you. I think Robin's comments towards the end on his penultimate chart are really pertinent. We have 3 meetings beyond this one for the rest of the year, in addition to the meeting that will be dedicated to the budget. So with 3 meetings, unless we decide to have further meetings, with 3 meetings, we really do have to focus in on a few areas and do them justice, and we can't possibly cover the whole of the all of the items perhaps that we would like to cover. It's just a thought. Okay, thank you. Let us move on with time running against us. Regeneration and planning. Later, are we going to have a contribution for that? Who is going to do
that? Chair, Abby did make her apologies. Yeah. She's on leave and she will be circulating her slides via email.
Fine. Okay.
On her return.
All right, so we haven't got Abby with us tonight, but we will get some slides. So thank you very much. And if we could also have slides from, I think Susan, if you could make sure we could get the slides that you use circulated. I don't think they were circulated earlier. So if we could just make sure we do that. Sorry? Well, finance didn't have any slides, so there'll be no slides to come from that.
Certainly, Chair, I'll circulate them first thing in the morning.
Thank you very much indeed. Could I just say thank you to all of the officers? That was a lengthy session, but I think it was, I hope members feel that was a worthwhile session to better understand the areas where we are expected to provide scrutiny. Any other thoughts or questions before we move to the next agenda item? Sorry, yeah.
So if we are to scrutinise fully, surely we should have more meetings to allow us to do so. I mean, if we're having to filter out certain divisions where we just don't have time to scrutinise, why don't we just have more meetings?
We can have more meetings. They have to be supported. So there have to be the staff to support them and we have to be willing to come to them. But yes, we can have more meetings. So that's certainly a thing which we can do. Or we could set up a subgroup, for instance. That would be a perfectly sensible thing to do, to take 2 or 3 members who would say specialize on the collaboration or specialize on housing or specialize on some other aspect. And really, you know, and they can meet offline and then come back with a report to this committee. That's another way we can do things. A further thing that we could do would be to have some information sessions, which maybe we could open to other councillors if they want to come in. So we could have a special meeting for a couple of hours on a particular subject. We did that, for instance, a year or two ago on asset management, for instance, and there was a lot of interest on asset management. And we spent 2 or 3 hours going through that. Insurance was another thing that one of our members was really interested in, and we honed in on that. And that was very interesting with the remarks that we had tonight. So there are ways in which we can handle things, but as things stand at the moment, there are 4 further meetings, one of which will be dedicated to the budget. So there are 3 main meetings, and then whatever else we decide to do. Okay, thank you. Let's then move on to the last substantive item for the evening, and that's the agenda item on the corporate performance report, which is a fairly weighty document, and not all of which belongs to this committee. I did mention to you a day or two ago that it's only the first section of this report which is of interest to this committee, although it may be interesting for you to look through what the other scrutiny committee is doing as well. Shall we have a few comments to start with, Jan, and then we can go on from there.
Thank you, Chair. So the quarterly performance report provides a progress update and performance analysis of the 12 service areas each quarter. At this meeting, we're looking at Q4 for 22-23. In September, we'll be looking at Q1 for the new year. In November, Q2. And then in March next year, we'll be looking at Q3. The first few pages of the performance report explain how the performance is assessed. Page 3 shows a summary of the service areas and which areas are scrutinized by this committee. And then up to page 15 is the corporate section, which provides an overview of the council's performance as a whole, which is then followed by the individual service areas. Each section begins with a narrative completed by the relevant head of service, which gives highlights of that quarter. This is followed by the KPI performance specific to that service area, and also showing the performance for the last 5 quarters. Each service area has a business plan, a service plan, which is completed each year. The next section of each area shows an update of the progress of the service plan, which is really the commitment and the focus for each service area. The next section is the complaints. Again, this shows the performance of the last 5 quarters for that service area. And then the last section is the finance tables for each service area. So if you have any questions, they will be answered directly by the relevant executive head of service. And if the relevant officer is not here, I can take questions away and come back with a written response.
Jenny, thank you very much indeed. Okay. So do people understand what we're doing? Have they read, they understand the broad scope of what we're looking at here? This is a quarterly thing, and we see the similar figures each quarter. Shall we take the corporate dashboard first and move from pages 4 to 15? Are there any questions on the corporate dashboard that anybody wants to ask? Or are there any questions on the way the figures are laid out? Or is anybody confused as to how they're able to look at them or understand them? Do ask anything you like here, even if it sounds a rather foolish question. Maybe I could kick off and go straight to page 6, which is page 68 of the overall agenda papers. And that's the total number of complaints. We've got that quarterly, but in the last year, my sum of the 4 quarters were 340 complaints. Before that, in the 21-22 year, there were 296, and the year before that, it came to a total of 293. I've simply added the quarterly numbers together. So the last year, we've had complaints overall go up by 15%, and I just wondered why the number of complaints has gone up so much. And maybe we could get an answer there. I'm looking at the bottom of page 68 or page 6 of the report.
Yeah, so there can be various different reasons. I suspect housing is probably part of that, and Andrew will be able to give you a bit more detail into why there's been an increase in housing complaints. I'd have to drill down quite a lot more into the detail, but yeah, I suspect it's housing, and there's a couple of other areas that particularly have contributed to this Q4 result as well. We would never discourage complaints from being submitted because they're an important way for us to learn as to how to improve our services. So, you know, the complaints are never a bad thing. They're a learning opportunity to make sure that we learn from them. But yes, we can have a bit more detail on that for you. We can get that for you. But yeah,
I think the rising trend is something which I'm concerned at. And if we go to the next page, page 7 or page 69 of the agenda papers overall, the level 1 total complaints, the percentage responded to within the target timeframe is only 56% compared with a target of 95%. That's a fairly low percentage answered on time. Is there anything more you want to add on that?
Yep. So for Q4, that was sort of 2 service areas that contributed to that primarily. One was housing, and Andrew has covered in his area as to why that happened. The other one was to do with a service that isn't here, represented by the other areas committee, but to do with repeat sort of collection issues. On a corporate level, we have recently worked to ensure that we've got service complaints administrators for all departments. So there's a bit of a turnover, so we had a couple of gaps that contributed to a couple of delays as well. So we've now got service complaint administrators in place for all services, and we're undertaking a training program with anyone who's new to that service at the moment as well, to make sure that they understand responsibilities and how the system works, and kind of their role in that, to ensure that there are people in services. We've also, for the big services that get higher levels of complaints, put in backup service complaints administrators. So if someone is on leave, nothing should fall down the gap or cause any delays in responses either now.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I mean, I think it's only right to come in on the housing complaints. And if you look, I think it's page 93 in your pack, you'll see an awful lot of reds on responsive repairs. Now, I think I mentioned earlier, we had a perfect storm last winter, which kind of carried on a little bit. We had issues with our gas contractor, Central Heating Services. We had to give notice for poor performance, and we had to appoint a temporary interim contractor, Smith and Byford, that are now up and running. The kind of phasing out of the old contractor and phasing in of the new, coupled with a very cold winter, coupled with old boilers breaking down, meant we had a huge number of complaints that took longer than normal to address, and is still happening now. Linking with that, performance issues with our responsive repairs contractor, Ian Williams. We were going to hold their feet to the fire last week. They held their own feet to the fire when I met with them, and they admitted they'd not been performing as they should have done, and they've been putting new members of staff in and bolstering the workforce. Part of the problem is actually been with subcontractors and recruiting direct trades. It has been a problem, and certainly we expect to see considerable improvement on those responsive repairs figures in the next 2 quarters. I think it would be, just as an aside in brackets, if we would have a subgroup from this committee looking perhaps at that area of housing, it would be useful. Certainly the tenants panel are very concerned about the repairs information, and the Landlord Services Executive Working Group also, and the contractor will be coming to speak with them, and they'll be meeting the new senior members of Ian Williams that will be working with us. So this is an area that we cannot afford to fall back on. We've got to continually improve, and so that is why there is a lot of red, and we are taking steps to improve on that. We did have a perfect storm in the winter.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm certainly aware of a lot of complaints, and social media is covering an awful lot of complaints, and it's very clear on page 31 here where the difficulties are. Are there any other thoughts on that maybe wants to add? Okay, Andrew?
I think anybody who's in the property business understands that trying to get trades has been an increasing challenge over the last few years. How do you anticipate to actually get ahead of the curve on that? Because everybody's looking for more tradesmen and there aren't enough around. And do you pay more, or what's the answer?
Well, we have a contract with Ian Williams, and in one sense, councillor, it's their problem because we pay them to do a job of work, and that is to deliver that responsive repairs service. We are mindful of the issues that the industry faces. Certainly, they are recruiting more direct operatives and not relying on subcontractors, because a lot of the problems with subcontractors, and I was told last week that we would see a bulging workforce while they recruited new operatives before they let others go. So they weren't going to be just letting people go and hoping to recruit. So they've assured us that performance will go up. I've had 2 major meetings with them in the last week. Early this week, we met with customer services, we met with housing management, with Ian Williams and sales. We all sat around the table and we said, what isn't working well and how can we fix it? So I think we are, what I would like to say is the beginning of an improvement process, but the KPIs will tell the story. It is a challenge, yes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Any other questions that people want to raise? If I can then from the chair go on with 1 or 2 other points. On page 71 or page 9 of the report, with the general fund account summary table going over the page into page 72, I always find these figures very difficult. And the last time I saw these numbers or something like these numbers were in the last budget discussions in February, March time. There was a very helpful summary of the general fund on page 2, which showed the figures for the year. Would it be possible to provide us with a yearly figure which balanced to the figures that we saw in the budget papers in February, March time?
Chairman, Rosie's committed to, she's had this comment already, and she is committed to working with you to give you a reconciliation of the numbers in the format that you'd like.
Thank you. I mean, members of the committee, I've had this sort of difficulty all the time that I've been a member of this this council. I'm an accountant, and I find the numbers very difficult to understand. When you come in from private industry, everything's round the wrong way to start with. And when you get used to that, then the whole analysis structure is very difficult. And also the gross and net situations within a borough council make things very, very difficult. The overall figures that we deal with are quite large. The net figure is actually relatively small. And so it makes life very, very difficult. I understand the difficulties, but it would be nice if we could get that. So I will take that offline, if I may, with you. Okay, any other thoughts from anybody? Zoe?
Could someone just talk us through page 73 or page 11? What does the row mean? It's on the bottom half of the page when it talks about properties for 8,000, so 8 million, 2 million, and then -5. Maybe that's a positive, I'm not sure.
4th line, the bottom section called capital. We're looking at capital assets and property, and you're particularly looking at the property line, the 4th one down, beginning 8081, finishing at 5260.
One second, Chair, I'm just finding it. What page?
Yes, the question is that the budget was 8 million, but we only invested or only spent 2.8 million. So there's 5.2 million which wasn't spent, if I understand the numbers right.
Yeah, so what that's showing is that there's a capital program on property which relates to a couple of the regen properties that are being built out at the moment. So the 8 million represents the full value of the project, but here you're only seeing a 1-year snapshot. There are future years, and that's what the carry forward represent.
You then also go to page 77 or page 15 of the report. You see the on the HRA area on our housing revenue account, we see that the capital for new builds and for stock remodeling, the intent was to spend 13.7 million in the last year. And we only spent 4.2 billion, so nearly 10 million wasn't spent, if I understand that correctly. Do you want to make any comment on that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, this has been spoken of before. All sorts of reasons in terms of planning, in terms of procurement, in terms of being able to get contractors and procure a contractor and go all through all the hoops meant that there was slippage on some major schemes. All those schemes are now on site with contractors. So we will see an improving picture, but it was again a bit of a perfect storm on a number of the schemes taking an awful lot longer to bring forward than we hoped.
One of the things that we looked at in our last meetings was the project to refurbish 7 of our homes at very considerable expense to the highest standards that we could. That may be something Andrew wants to comment on. Can we get a report back on that next time just to see how we're doing?
Yes, certainly, Chairman, we can do that. Yes, the contract is now signed and the work will begin and should finish by next April.
Fine, thank you. Other thoughts? There was one further thing that I wanted to bring up. Oh, the key performance indicators on page 20 of the report. Well, I guess we've covered the level of complaints. I'm looking at the table at the bottom of page 20 on the level of complaints, but I think we've talked about that fairly exhaustively. But I just wanted to draw attention to members that there are lots of measurements in here which we need to keep an eye on, and you'll get to know them better. I just wondered on page 83 with reference number CC3B, which is the percentage of freedom of information and EIR requests responded to, which is 94, 95%. I just wondered in the various quarters, how many FOI and EIR requests do we have in the year, or typically how many a quarter do we actually get? The actual number of requests rather than the measurement of how quickly we're dealing with them.
I think we will have to take that one away and get the figure for you.
Just be interested to know whether the trend is going up or down or where we are with that.
Yeah,
it's quite a difficult area. Okay, so are there any other thoughts on this area? Okay, well, let's draw that to a close. I'm very conscious of the fact that if you're a new member, it's very difficult to get your brain around all of the measurements, and you think, and it's very difficult to really understand them. But when you've seen them once, the next time round, you'll see them and you'll get to see some of the trends, and you'll be better and acquainted with them and be able, I'm sure, to give us some much more interesting challenges and questions. Janet.
Yes, it is a bit of a thing to get your head around, not least the numbering. I mean, I find it very confusing. Well, I've now understood when people say page 39, they actually mean 101 or vice versa, but or both. But it's, I suppose it's the only way we can do it, really, is it? Having this sort of dual system and hoping for the best?
Well, it's a matter of taking a report, and then the main number is our agenda papers. We could get to, so yes, you get used to that, but it's just one of the little idiosyncrasies of the system. But it is difficult, I accept, to catch on straight away. Okay, well, look, we've got 10 minutes before I would like to try and conclude the meeting. The thing that we want to look at now is the committee work programme. This was originally agenda item 6. If you take a look at that, well, it breaks into several areas. Firstly, the part 1 is a summary of the recommendations that were made in the past that we are dealing with or have dealt with or which get carried forward. On page 17, you get to other resolutions. Well, there aren't any. Again, on page 17, you get part 3, which is upcoming items, where we've got various things that could come before this committee, which could be proposed for scrutiny, which we need to consider. And then lastly, it looks at the Waverley Borough Council key decisions and forward programme of work that the executive is looking at. And this is something where you may want to keep your eye on executive papers. There may be things which are of considerable concern to you, and which may be part of this committee's remit, and therefore which you may wish to bring to this committee. By all means, give me a call if you've got a thought on what we could do, and discuss that as we go forward in the future. There are a number of areas which I think we could bring into the next meeting. One thought is on the property and asset investment side, which might be useful to bring in. One or two people have mentioned to me that they'd like to look at economic development in the future. There is a considerable area of thought that we have to put in on housing. Andrew Smith mentioned that we may want to form a subcommittee which is focused on housing alone. If we were to do that, I would suggest that that should be something like 3 people, certainly no more. It could be 2, but if there were 2 or 3 members, I mean, maybe Andrew might like to chair that as a sort of subcommittee. Would there be any other members that might be interested in doing that? Lauren and Michaela and Terry. Well, we've got 3 members there. Maybe you're spared, Andrew. If 3 members are interested, perhaps we should form a little housing subcommittee. Andrew, I wonder if you might throw a straw man at me in the next few days and say, if we were to have this, what you would select as the way in which we could structure that. Lauren, you've got a thought on that as well.
I wondered if it could also cover investment assets. So maybe you're thinking this anyway. But when you say
that's not something, you can't mix the two together. So housing revenue is very much our social housing.
Yeah.
Our investment side, as such as it is completely different and completely separate, and you can't mix the two together.
Okay, I'd be interested in looking at both.
Yeah, no, well, that's, yeah, I understand your interest in both, but it's not something which we can move. And of course, what you also have to understand is that the government have taken away our ability to invest for income. So that we've got some historical assets where we have got income, and which we need to bring to the best of advantage. But yes,
exactly. So it's about making sure that you're maximising your returns.
Exactly right. Yes, we can think about that. The HRA thing is separate and different. But if we could then perhaps think of Michaela, Laura, and Terry, and so you can make a note of those of that, Leila, that would be great, and you can sort out between yourselves who wants to chair that little group. Andrew, would it be a thought that you could throw an idea of how we might structure that out, and then I'm sure that those 3 people could then think about that and maybe develop it in a way.
That would be fine, Chairman. Yes, that'd be good.
Would that be something which you could do?
Yes, I will do that.
I think that might be very helpful. Thank you for that. And what the structure and the terms and how we're going to do it, we'll need to think about. But if we could suggest that, I think that's a very sound plan. The other things that there are lots of things that I've made a note about, which is agile working, asset investment management. I think it's a very important, we really, in my view, need to focus in on the collaboration agreement with Guildford Borough Council, and link to that also our own efforts in transformation, business transformation. The idea of the collaboration is to save money as a serious thing going forward. So I think we need to look at that, in my view. There is the autumn services review, which is coming up, which is primarily the collaboration. Could you help me on that, Robin? Is that right?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sorry, in terms of the Guildford collaboration, we've got an autumn services review that was mentioned. Is that primarily collaboration?
We can certainly make it about collaboration. As I said in my presentation earlier, I think this committee should be looking at transformation and collaboration as part of its work.
I think that that's an extremely important thing, and I would want to bring that to the committee for the next meeting. What I'll do is I will take away and discuss with Andrew and others how we order this thing, because we need to understand, we can't bring them in before they're ready to be brought in, but we need to bring them in at the right moment so that we can have our maximum impact. But agile working, asset investment management, collaboration, transformation, housing, climate change plan is another area which I've written down, which we could think about. We've talked about a housing subgroup. There may be, and in part 3, there are lots of other areas here which we could perhaps think about. Complaints as an area, and if you look on the service plans for the executive coming up, there are thoughts that where there are areas coming up. BID, the bids, for instance, with the 3 towns, with Farnham and with Haslemere and with Godalming, that might be worthy of bringing up into this group. And there are other areas there too. Are there any areas that anybody wants to suggest that we might want to add to that very considerable list? Peter.
Chair, just listening to your list of areas you may want to look at. You might want to prioritise where you look at, considering where Waverley's going in the next couple of years. So you look at the MTFP, you look at the key risks that are being run there, and you're focusing on the big drivers within that MTFP. And maybe some of these other items you may get to in time, but certainly where Waverley's going in the next 6 to 12 months financially, you may want to be looking a bit more at the budget areas and the more strategic side of those budgets.
I think that's important. I think probably new members particularly would need to understand the plan, the medium-term financial plan. It may be that we should have at our next session a presentation on that because that's important. We do it to death in the budget round in the meeting which we have in February next year. But I think before we do that, it will be quite helpful to have a reset of the medium-term financial plan. Jerome?
Would that be possibly best handled as a separate information meeting rather than fill up one of our schedules?
Yes, would members be happy to have a separate session on that? We'll try and fit another session in. I think that's very useful because otherwise we'll use up a whole meeting on an information session. It's very difficult to get up to speed quickly in a committee of this sort where we're trying to bring together. So Peter, is that something which we could do maybe an evening, or would I guess it has to be an evening meeting? Is there any potential for a day meeting for Zoe? It's difficult for you. It's almost impossible, I think, for you to do a day meeting, isn't it? Others could. Morning is possible. Sorry, I may choose to do that because it's difficult to get evenings. There are so many meetings which are already chiseled into evenings. It's very difficult to get a time. But I'm very happy to take you through separately with the presentation that's made on that. Or maybe we can get you a separate session anyway. Peter?
So, Chair, you may want to tie that in with the imminent budget strategy, the whole plan of where we're going and how we're going to be building the budget, all the service reviews that we'll be launching in the autumn at Waverley, looking at the detailed dive into how we deliver services and how that drives cost in this organisation to understand where it's going. That way, the members will get the best benefit from understanding how these numbers tie into what we physically do as an organisation.
Paragraph which just describes that, which I could then put out. Okay, I think that would be very worthwhile, running a 2-hour session in a morning, maybe in early. When would be a good time? Peter, would early September, would that be a time to do that, or when would be the best time, do you think?
Well, Chair, I'm not actually going to be here in early September, so you may want to hold out for your new incumbent, and then Rosie obviously will have to help drive this, and Rosie drives the budget process anyway. So between Rosie, Candace, and you probably want to invite Councillor Merriweather along as portfolio holder, because he does have a lot of information that he can share with you on this.
Well, yes, I'm very conscious of the fact that you're leaving us, but Rosie and Mark Merriweather could well run a session like that for us. And I would suggest a sort of 9:30 to 11:30 sort of meeting would be perhaps a good time to do that, a 2-hour session. And the advantage of that is you can ask any stupid question you want without members of the public perhaps looking at what you're doing. I mean, it makes it a much more informal and easy session to go through. I think that would be very helpful. So maybe early September would be a good plan to do that. We'll get something into the timetable. So that's a good thought. So that's 2 substantial items. If we're going to have a housing subsection of 3 members, and thank you for volunteers on that. If we have a 2-hour session in September, where we focus in on the budget strategy and on the MTFP as a scene setter for us. And I think if you'd like to leave the rest with me in terms of what I put into the next meeting, and I'll speak to Andrew about that and to officers, and I'll try and prioritize from what we've done during the course of this meeting. Does that sound a good approach? Are you happy to leave that with me to go through? Okay, fine. Well, thank you. I think that's been extremely helpful, and I hope you've all got a better idea of what the committee does and the sort of things that we might be able to tackle as we go forward. And I think we've had some really useful time there. One or two notices. There will be on the 19th of July, which is next week, next Wednesday, at 6:30, a briefing on one of the major projects that was referred to earlier on, and that's the subject of the 69 High Street. Is that still on as a meeting? We have fixed that. So there will be a briefing for all members. It could have been another meeting of this committee. I thought it was probably more sensible to have it as an all-member briefing. And if you can make that, it would be very useful. 69 High Street, there is a cost. It was acquired by us a year ago or 18 months ago. But what we'll be looking at is the development of it and what the council intend to do with it. And the cost of that is a decision which will have to come to the full council at some point. So we need to have a look at it. We ought to be able to scrutinise that. It's not quite a scrutiny meeting, but it is an all-member briefing. That will be, I think, available by Zoom as well, or is it only in person?
Yeah, it was on Zoom, and it will be held here at 6:30 p.m. on 19th of July. Which
is next Wednesday. So that's either in person or by Zoom. That will be a useful meeting to attend. I've mentioned the next meetings. The next formal meeting of this committee is on Tuesday, the 19th of September. And that will be followed then after that by the meeting on the 14th of November. That will complete the formal meetings for this year. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Are there any thoughts or observations that anybody has on the style of meeting, how we're doing, what we want to do? Maybe if you don't want to say anything now, if you want to speak to me or to Andrew separately and suggest that there may be different ways that you could think of where we could do the job better, I'd be very appreciative of any input. So are there any other comments that anybody wants to make before I close the meeting? Before I close the meeting, can I just say one further thing? And this is the last meeting that I think that we will have as a committee with Peter Vickers with us. Peter is sadly leaving us to go to pastures new, not too far away, just across the border in Hampshire. And I would just like from the chair to say thank you for all the work and the support that you've put into this committee and to this council indeed. And I would, and I'm sure other members of the committee will join me in wishing you well and wishing you every success in Rushmore. And bon voyage. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Very kind of you.
Okay, I did say I'd try for 9:15. Well, 9:21 is not too bad, but the meeting is